as I get older. And I really want to impress that on my son. And I know the best way to do that is to model those values myself.
Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys, the podcast of great conversations with men. I'm your host, Chris Foster, and we're going to explore how we wear this beautiful and confusing mantle of manhood in the 21st century. Look, I get it. In public life, a lot of men are knuckleheads. But in private life, we can be thoughtful and we can be reflective if we have the right conversation, if we feel comfortable talking about our story. And we all have a great story to tell. And we can all learn from those stories. We can learn about who we've been, who we are, and who we want to be. And that's why we're going to have this conversation, so we can learn from other men just like us. And that's why we're going to talk again with my friend Jeff. If you missed the first episode, I highly recommend you listen to episode 1. He had so much story to tell that he needed 2 episodes. This one's really focused on more of the ideas over the experiences. You know, a mantle is defined as a noun, as a cloak, and as a responsibility that passes from one person to the next. This conversation talks about that mantle of manhood and how he drapes that on himself and how he thinks about draping that on his son, how it was draped on him by his father, and so on. It's a fantastic conversation about the heart of how to be a great man. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys. All right. Well, Jeff Wilbur, welcome back.
Glad to be back.
So, one of the ideas of this podcast is exploring how we wear this beautiful and confusing mantle of manhood. And I use that phrase really intentionally. A mantle is defined as a cloak. It's something you wear. It wraps around you. A mantle is also defined as an important role or responsibility that passes from one person to another. And I think of Homo sapien as, one of the more unique species that teaches the next generation not just skills to survive, but we teach the next generation how to teach, right? So way back in the Wayback Machine, a young boy was going on that first hunt. Vital that the young boy understands how to hunt. Yes, it's a passage to manhood, but he has to learn how to hunt. Why? Because the survival of the tribe depends on the next generation knowing how to hunt, and it depends on the next generation knowing how to teach how to hunt. So we're all in these lives bearers of the responsibility to teach and to be taught. And so for men, typically it's a father that does the first teaching. In fact, the British primogeniture laws codified that property, titles, estates, and wealth, etc., would be passed down to the eldest son. It was in the law. So there's always been, I think, this heart connection between a father to a son to teach, right? Of course, with mothers and daughters as well. But in our conversation about men, a father or a father figure is usually that first person that teaches you, and hopefully you learn, and you are looking to get that learning. So I guess my first question for you, Jeff, is what was something that your dad taught you, either explicitly or through his behavior and your observation?
Well, at almost every turn, I think my dad taught me through example. Certainly, there were times in my childhood when we would pull over and there would be specific instruction. But when I think back about my father and our relationship and how he taught me, it was almost entirely of by example. And humility, which would surprise probably every single person that knows me, is something that my dad had. He was quiet. He was not the main event. He was a appetizer in every conversation. He was a sideshow. But he possibly listened more than he talked. And wearing the mantle myself now and experiencing that role with my son, I hope to be that figure 1 minute at a time throughout the entirety of my relationship with my son.
That's wonderful. And I guess, are you then following your dad's lead, do you think, by teaching by example versus a kind of overt moments of, hey, son, I have a pearl. I'd like to drop you this pearl. Will you pick it up?
It's a good question. And this exercise and doing these interviews with you has really brought me present to this role and how I approach it. And it's reminded me of how important it is that I be a father to my son. And certainly, foremost, I'll lead by example, but there will be times when specific instruction will be suitable, and I need to make sure that I answer that bell.
Yeah, I think that that's key, right? Because what I've learned as parent is that your children are watching all the time and you don't quite know what they're looking at and what they're seeing and when they're watching. One of my favorite lines in Avengers Endgame, because I'm a big Marvel buff, is when Tony Stark, who plays Iron Man, shows up and he sees his own dad after traveling back in time. And he's confronting him. And at that time, Tony Stark is a father himself. And he's seeing his dad, who's about to have Tony Stark as a kid, right? And so the older Tony Stark is nervous and
Mm-hmm.
he's worried about it. And he says, "What? Are you a father?" He goes, "Yeah. What was your father like?" And then the younger Tony Stark says, "Well, my old man, he dropped the odd pearl." And I just love that phrase, to drop a pearl. And
Mm-hmm.
then it's incumbent upon the person to pull that pearl in, right? To take that
Mm-hmm.
pearl. And
Mm-hmm.
so as you start thinking about your dad, do you remember a time when either he was aware of it or not, but he dropped that pearl for you and you picked it up?
Mm, nothing, nothing comes immediately to mind here for me on that one, Chris. I don't know if it was the socioeconomic pressure that my family seemed to always exist under or not. I don't know, man. I mean, I think he was just, you know, focused on providing and
Mm-hmm.
surviving
Mm-hmm.
and keeping it all together. And this is tricky because I don't want to sell my father short here. But there was a bit of a pack your own shoot thing going on from an early age for me.
Roger. And your dad was a foreman manufacturing plant in Cleveland, Ohio, 50s, 60s, 70s. Look, I grew up in Pittsburgh in the 70s and 80s when the steel industry collapsed. And that's an area of the country where there is a lot of humility, right? Even in Pittsburgh, if you are like the top guy in Pittsburgh, like Don Cannon, who was the newscaster, right? The top guy, come on, bro, you're still in Pittsburgh,
Hmm.
right? It's not like you're on Fifth Avenue, right, or
Yeah,
the Upper
yeah,
West Side, right? You're in Pittsburgh, and so
yeah.
there's a baked in sense of, not, I wouldn't say position in place that means that you can't strive or move along, but there's a position of understanding who you are and who you're not. And I guess maybe when you looked at your dad going through his daily work, I would imagine that those were all pearls. Seeing him go to work every day, come home, trying to provide and making the best of the situation that he had.
Absolutely. And as you suggest, putting a membrane between us and whatever struggles were going on or whatever pressure he was feeling. And as this notion unfurls itself in my mind now, I really think that what you said is true. It was an economic time that was challenging for blue collar Americans in Ohio and Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad got laid off and he had a mortgage, a wife, and 4 kids and no job.
Oh,
And I think that was probably a very, very tense time in his life, but we ate dinner every night. There was a roof over our head always. But I think that, he was managing that reality on a daily basis.
yeah. And, it's interesting managing that reality. It's you don't quite know what the next day is going to be sometimes. And you
Mm-mm.
try to be the best dad you can and be present in the moment, but you're also a person too. It took me a
Mm-hmm.
really long time for me to see my dad as a person in and of his own self
Mm-hmm.
and not just my dad.
Yeah. And that's the sadness of how young he was when my father passed away. You know, we didn't have I mean, I was in my mid 20s when he passed away, so I was certainly a man, but we didn't have the seasoning of a man to man father son relationship because I had gone away to the Navy. So we didn't that aspect of our relationship, that real seasoning of a exchange of ideas, values, topics between two men, unfortunately was stolen from me by his early passing.
Yeah, that's significant. Do you mind if I ask you a question about that? Because you had talked about the brave and consequential choice of becoming sober.
Hmm.
Did that happen after he died or before he died?
That happened after he died.
So he never got to see the man that you might become.
Not on God's earth, he didn't. But
Right.
Chris, remember, he was breaking down himself under his own disease, so it wouldn't have been like uh, an amazing moment of clarity for him because I don't know that he had amazing moments of clarity when he was on the back nine of his life. So yeah, he'll be looking down on us now
Right.
and hopefully have some pride in who I've become.
I know he would have some pride in who you have become. One thing that I found interesting with my relationship with my dad as I became an adult and I got to see him as his own self, is it got me thinking about his relationship with his dad. When
Hmm.
we were young, he would talk about my grandfather, his dad, and some memories were not great and it was moments of terror, but he would also talk about the qualities that I might not have seen, right? That the qualities of hard work, the qualities of a professional achievement. Did your dad talk about his father to you?
No, or at least minimally. His
Hmm.
father lived in the neighborhood with us, and we would visit with them. They would visit with us. And it's interesting as I age and I experience myself and my personality and my tone and my
Mm-hmm.
tempo and my mood, my moods, I remind myself of my father's father,
Hmm.
and it scares me because he was a brooding man, and I do not want to be a brooding man. So, in some respects, a fine man, a family man, a career man, he was always there. But I want to be careful because I have a lot to be grateful for and a lot to be happy about. And so I want to always remind myself to be grateful and to be happy about what I have to be happy about and not to go through life looking at the ground.
That's right. And I think that also too, that our fathers can teach us a lot about um, kind of men that they might want us to be, or we can learn things that we would want to be. But I think
Hmm.
profoundly we can learn things about what we don't want to be, right? And
For
who
better
we
or for
don't.
worse, they show us what to do, and then there are instances where they're showing us what not to do.
That's right. And I struggled where, I was trying to figure out the kind of man I wanted to become. And, my dad showed me a lot of ways in which, to live a life of curiosity, a life of multiple interests, a life of, deep interest into the arts, philosophy, history, everything, right? To have a very curious mind. But he also worked 80 hours a week.
Mm.
And it's what I didn't want to do as I saw him go through his own passage. And he was a psychiatrist and ran the drug and alcohol unit at Butler Memorial Hospital. He was a phenomenal professional. And, but I had also met another psychiatrist, kind of as one of his cohorts, an old college friend of his, right, much later in my life. And he was around the house. He was doing chores. He was engaged. He wasn't working 80 hours a week. And I was like, I thought every psychiatrist worked 80 hours a week. Maybe I
Mm.
don't have to work 80 hours a week.
Mm.
And that had a profound, um, incredibly definitive driver of my life and the choices that I made with my kids. So I took them to school every day. I was home pretty much every evening and tried to balance my professional growth and being engaged with them, because I didn't want to be who that was, right? So I guess a question that I would have is you start, talking about teaching your son through example and learning from your dad. What are you hoping that your son is learning from you?
Oof, that's a good one. What am I hoping my son is learning from me? Everything. I mean, with every decision that I make, every action that I take, I do it mindful of the fact that my son is paying attention. As you
Mm-hmm.
suggested earlier, our kids are paying close attention to what we're up to, and they're remembering everything we do. And as I said, this light really came on for me in the course of getting divorced when this counselor told me that this was going to be an opportunity for my daughter to see how a man behaves when he's a man and he's not getting his way. This is how he behaves. And this was an opportunity for my son to see the same thing, to do this with dignity and
Mm.
maturity. And now I'm constantly thinking about what I'm doing and how it might look to my son, and and understanding that it's impactful and it's important. And as I said, happiness, gratitude, compassion, these are values, latent values for me, values that I'm really appreciating more and more as I get older. And I really want to impress that on my son. And I know the best way to do that is to model those values myself.
We'll be right back. So your son is entering into his young adulthood, early 20s, and the mantle now is not just shifting to your son, but also to his cohort, to his whole friend group. And when I think about that, I also think about that and what happens in the professional world, because your son now is going to have a whole lot of other models of manhood that he's going to be exposed to when he goes into college, when he sees teachers, when he gets a job that's a real job. If you could walk us back to when you started, when you exited the Navy, 27, and went to college, a little bit older than some students, right? SDSU.
Mm-hmm.
That's much older. That's a big time difference between those students. When you went there, did you actually find folks that could be a model for you in your cohort, or was there a disjointedness between your age and purpose and experience and the other students you were around?
I was working full time and going to school full time. So I wasn't exactly, I wasn't in a mode where I was sponging up impressions from other people. I was locked in on academics and getting through school. As we already discussed, I wasn't getting any younger, and I was efforting to graduate from undergrad college by the time I was 30.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, and again, I was working full time. I was living on
Sure.
my own. I was barely getting by financially. So no real role models came to mind. I studied finance at San Diego State, and so I had a developing interest in business, and that was nurtured by the classes that I was taking, and led to the career that I chose after I graduated.
That's fantastic. And you've had a fantastic career. And what I noticed when I started my career is, without even being aware for it, I would be hungry for mentors if they would drop those pearls, right? Drop those professional pearls. And as I started to build up, uh, going to the marketing world, there was a moment when my daughters were young and I was kind of working, getting to this director level, right? And in marketing, that's a pretty big transition from a manager to director. It seems small and trite at when you say it, but if anyone's experienced that career, that's a big jump in terms of responsibility, in terms of what it means for your career path. And my VP at the time was talking with me, and I had had a professional mentor before who was a game changer for me professionally, but not in terms of life. And so, but this VP was talking with me, and his name is Blake. He's a wonderful man. And he said, he says, "How you doing?" Blah blah blah. And I said, "Well," he says, "No, really, how you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm really trying to work my arse off, and the kids are young, and my wife is like, hey, I really need you to be present, and I'm also trying really hard to build these new skills, and my brain's getting larger, and it's a challenge." And I said, "I'm just trying to build it up." And he said some really important life phrases for me. He really dropped a pearl. And he said, "Look, as you get older, if you're open to it, your capacity to handle things gets greater, right? Your capacity to absorb starts to grow." And so at that time, I remember watching a documentary about the ocean and creatures and stuff. And there's a lobster. There's a guy, the lobster starts to get into his shell and it's uncomfortable and he has to break his shell and then he has to go under a rock for protection. Right. In the David Attenborough voice, which I did a horrible job of mashing
Not
up.
bad.
Not bad. Thank you. But I was thinking, I was like, oh man, all right. So what a great analogy. When the lobster starts to grow, it gets uncomfortable because it's hitting the edge of its shell. It has to shed the shell and it's vulnerable. It's completely exposed.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to go under a rock and hole up and figure it out and convert all of its energy into building that new shell. And then
Mm-hmm.
suddenly it comes out of the rock. And what is it? It's bigger. It's a
Mm-hmm.
bigger lobster. It grew.
Mm-hmm.
And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, that's it. That's my mental image of capacity to handle more. So that was the pearl I took from Blake and that funny documentary. But I remember clearly passing that on to my daughter one time. It was through, the teenage years are challenging. She's adding more things. She's doing all this stuff. And I said, "Honey, you're lobstering right now. That's why
Mm-hmm.
it's so uncomfortable."
Mm-hmm.
So it was important for me to kind of make those connections, and it started with my professional mentor dropping that in.
Mm-hmm.
Did
Mm-hmm.
you have a professional mentor that was pivotal in dropping a pearl, not only for your profession but also for your life?
Yeah, I think we've talked about this a little bit, and I've answered this question with other people before too. I really haven't had any significant mentors in my life. I've worked for some fine men in my career, and certainly each of those fine men that I've worked for have provided wisdom to me, but there hasn't been anything profound. I do remember when I was working this would be 20 years ago when I was first into my banking career, and I was there on a Friday. It was like 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the boss was over in his office, and I was looking out the window, and everybody else was going and getting their weekend started. And I went over to his office and bashfully asked if it would be okay if I took off a little early. And he stopped what he was working on, and he looked up and he said, "Absolutely, take off. You know, come in late on Monday if you like. You know what? Don't even come in on Monday if you don't feel like it. Take Tuesday off also." And I said, "Okay, I got it." And I went back to my desk and continued my work and made sure that I worked there later than him. And so, and
Right.
we know this now, be the first one there, the last one to leave, ask people if they need help with something, always be volunteering yourself, asking around, how can you help other people? And I hope that that model of work ethic has been apparent to my son, and I think it has.
Yeah. No, I think that's fantastic. And I think that just your mentality of seeking to find opportunities to give is so critical. Because you haven't been necessarily blessed with life altering or life changing mentors, do you now think that it's incumbent upon you to rectify that moving forward so that you're a little bit more eager to give?
Well, let me answer that question this way. I love teaching the younger people in the bank that I work at what I do and how I do it. And it's a passion that surprised me when it occurred to
Hmm.
me that I really enjoyed that. But I do enjoy it. And I particularly enjoy working with somebody that has the appetite and the drive themselves to do better. So it's a role I enjoy. It's new to me lately to have this role, and I do enjoy it. And then obviously and always, I'm a role model for my son in everything, including my professional career. And it's interesting. He's seeking to study economics in college, so who knows? He could follow in some form of my footsteps.
Absolutely. No, I think that the older I get, I'm trying to seek out those moments where you can drop that odd pearl because you don't know when it's going to get picked up. And there was I was on a business trip, and there was the hotel that I was staying at, the Reed Hotel in Chattanooga. If anyone goes to Chattanooga, go to the Reed Hotel. It's awesome. Art Deco, great bar, but there's a pool room, not a pool table, a pool room behind the bar. So you push back these velvet curtains, and lo and behold, leather couches, leather chairs, pool tables, bar stools.
Cool.
So there, right, old school. So there I was with my old
Yeah.
fashioned. I'm like, here we go. This is cool. And this kid walks back, and I say kid, but young adult, right? But now most everybody's younger than I am, it seems. And he walked back, and we started to talk. He was waiting for his food. He was doing a pickup, and I asked what he was doing, and he goes, "Well, I mean, I'm kind of in sales." And I was like, "So you're kind of in sales? What? I'm curious. What do you mean by kind of?" And he talked about some of his struggles that he was going through in his workplace and what he wanted to do. And he was didn't go to college. He was out of high school, started to go to sales, but I realized that, he was kind of looking at me because he said, "What are you in here for?" And I'm like, "I'm doing a presentation and blah, blah, blah." And he goes, I could tell he was looking at me like, "Okay, how do I get to the place where they're flying this guy out to do a presentation at a professional conference? What's the gap between me and him?" Right. And
Hmm.
I could see it in his eyes. Right.
A good question.
It's a great question. How do you get there? And so in that moment, I was like, okay, let's talk about what you are good at, what you really like to do, and tell me more about yourself. Right? I said, we only have a handful of minutes by the time your food comes in, and we can play a couple games of pool, but I'm here for you. Right? I'm not your dad. I'm not your uncle. I'm not your teacher. I'm not your boss. I'm from Mars, but I'm an older guy who's gone through a journey, and I can share a little bit of my story and what I did.
Hmm.
And so, I think that as we look around, it's incumbent upon us to offer those moments to that next generation.
Hmm. Exactly, especially if they express an interest or in some way communicate an interest in hearing that. It's definitely fulfilling to share that wisdom.
Now, I thought, am I right? Were you involved in Junior Achievement, the young person's business group?
I was, yes.
What was that like?
Well, it was interesting. My first foray into junior achievement was when my wife at the time was a teacher and she taught fifth grade, and I clandestinely connected with junior achievement and expressed an interest in doing a curriculum with her class. And that was
Hmm.
arranged so that on the day that that was to happen, we were both getting ready for work, and I asked her what she had going on that day. And she goes, well, I have someone coming into my classroom from junior achievement. I go, what's that? And she's like, I'm not exactly sure. It's some sort of an organization that teaches a curriculum on in an introductory manner about business to young elementary school students. Hmm. And then, of course, later that day, I walked into her classroom. And so that was a fun moment. And now that I think about it, that was the first time that I was in a teaching role about business. And that could have given me a clue that I might embrace that sort of a role as a teacher to
Hmm.
younger folks about this thing we call business. And I volunteered in her class in junior achievements, 5 1-hour lessons given once a week over a 5 week period. So I did it for her class, and I did it 3 or 4 more additional times. And it's interesting going into, in some instances, an urban high school setting. And I would always have a suit on and be walking with a briefcase with my curriculum in it, and possibly similar to the way the young man looked at you in the billiards room in Chattanooga. These students, some of them might have looked at me that way. And it's an interesting thing when that dawns on you that other people are looking at you as having arrived where they might one day like to arrive. And we never, before that moment, realized that we had gotten somewhere through all the work that we'd done. So it's an interesting evolution of thought.
Yeah, and I think that it gets back to the idea of mantle, because if you have a younger person looking at you with eager and hopeful eyes, suddenly there's a new responsibility.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to carry that mantle.
We'll be right back. And probably one of the most important mantle to pass on is to your son. We talked a lot about that. But I do have, um, through your everyday actions, you're trying to provide guidance and mentorship, not through a sermon or through, a single pivotal moment. Um, so I've got an odd question. What do you hope he says to his friends when he describes you to them?
Uh, Good dad, always there for him. He knows that I love him and that I believe in him, and then I support him, whatever decisions he makes, wherever he goes in his life.
Wonderful. I'm sure he does say that too, because as I look at it, not only are you guiding and instructing him on how he evolves through his life, but you're also guiding and instructing him on his potential role as a father for himself,
Hmm.
modeling not just manhood, but modeling fatherhood.
Hmm.
Um, you described earlier, Jeff, that you would visit your grandfather and he was a brooding man. I remember visiting my grandfather, and he was much older, of course, and he I wouldn't say it was an enigma, but he was not someone that I was like, oh, this is fantastic. I want to be just like you. That was not the case.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so I don't know if you've thought about this before, but do you have a vision of you being a grandfather, of your own grandfatherhood?
I do. I do. I would love to live in Southern California and have a little house and have a garden in the backyard and have my little boat and constantly be wearing cutoff shorts and flip-flops and a tank top and taking my son and my grandson surfing and for tacos whenever the two of them can get away from their respective lives. That would be my vision for my role as a grandfather.
That's a beautiful vision. I love that. I think that when we act every day, the fact that you're thinking about that as a future vision, right? Are you working towards that, do you believe, within your daily choices and how you're managing your life?
Absolutely. What do we have if we don't have our health?
Right.
So the health, I mean, I think our health always has to be a top priority. And of all of the things that I need to be taking seriously in my life, in this chapter of my life, probably my health is the thing that I'm most attentive to. And if I do this right, I know I have a lot more good life on this earth. And that's the part of my life that most supports that vision for me for the those grandfatherly years.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. All right. So I've got a couple of interesting questions about, more vision type things to help us understand you a little bit more and what's important to you. Let's say I gave you $10,000 and you had 2 weeks off. What would you do?
Well, I would probably find a young lady who had a couple of weeks that she could spend with me, and I would travel warm, Chris. There's much talk about, do you travel to a cool climate and go skiing or snowboarding, or are you going to travel to a warm climate? And I love Mexico and I love the coast of Mexico. I also like Hawaii, so I'd probably take the 10,000 bucks, get a couple of airplane tickets, go somewhere warm with a beach, and hopefully rent a surfboard and relax. How does that
It
sound?
all, that sounds fantastic. It almost sounds like your vision of your grandfatherly years. So hopefully that's going to work out.
We love it when a plan comes together.
That is true. One question that I also have for you is if you would recommend a book to another man that he should read, what would be that book?
Is it okay if I recommend one of the books that you recommended to me?
Naturally.
Well, I'm rereading Lonesome Dove. That's all that
Mm,
will I mean that's a classic top 3 book for me, Lonesome Dove. So I'll go with that by Larry McMurtry.
wonderful story. And it's a wonderful story. What I find throughout all the adventures, it's a story of friendship, right? It's a
Hmm.
story of brotherly and fraternal friendship that extends throughout years. And that's a great book to share. I was thinking
Hmm.
about that too. And this is a book that you've also read too. It's called A Gentleman in Moscow.
That was the other
Because
one that I was going to recommend.
you can't go wrong with Lonesome Dove and Gentleman in Moscow. Gentleman in Moscow is now it's a Netflix series, but what I liked about that was having a man figure out how to make the most of the situation that he's in. And so we often as would joke, what would Count Rostov do in a
Hmm.
situation? Um,
Hmm.
and as we start thinking about, you know, what we're showing to our sons and daughters in the next generation, what we're showing to these other young professionals, and what we're responsible for in terms of living a life. Those are great books to actually learn through what the characters went through to see how to live a life and, with dignity and maturity. And I thought that was so interesting earlier when you said, you learned, how to be a man through your divorce. And I was curious and I was going to ask you what that meant to you, but you answered it. You said
Hmm.
with dignity and maturity.
Yeah, it was a big pivotal time in my life, and we're all trying to grow and improve and learn. And for me, the growing, improving, and learning centers around my relationship with me, as I made reference to earlier about loving myself and especially having gratitude. I mean, if you can start everything with gratitude, and I don't know anyone who has more gratitude than you. So
Oh,
you're a great role model for me in that way. If you can start everything with gratitude, you're going to go to good places.
I agree. And in full disclosure, you're a great role model for me in terms of driving towards your authentic self and being more comfortable with who you are and learning how to be comfortable with who you are. I am so impressed by that. Um, this was
Thank you.
fantastic. Thank
That
you.
is my journey. That is my journey.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. Well, this is just marvelous, Jeff. And, I'm appreciative of this conversation, but, I'm really appreciative of our conversations just as men.
Hmm.
I don't think that men are having enough really good, deep conversations with other men.
I agree. And this conversation and these questions have brought it sort of to the forefront of my mind, to be present and to be aware of and to be awake to my role as a man centrally in my son's life, and to not just be a passenger on a train as it rides by, but to be an active participant in his life as his father and as a role model as a man.
Yeah. And what's interesting too, I think about this as well, because I don't have a son, I've got two daughters, but
Hmm.
sharing it with my daughters is so important because I also think women need to see that men can have deep conversations with other men, right? It's not just about sports and crap. It actually could be about ideas, thoughts, and feelings.
Well, good luck to the men who spend time with your daughters, because they have a huge set of shoes to fill with the amazing father that you've been to them.
Mm.
And I, again, just wish good luck to those young men who connect with your daughters.
Well, thank you for that. So I
And
think
I mean every minute of it.
I appreciate that very much. I do.
Hmm.
So what I would encourage and hope that you would encourage men to do is have conversations, talk with other guys. Right? We have the blessings of being surrounded by men where, yeah, we yik yak and BS, but we can also have some meaningful conversations to help us get through this journey. So if you're out there and you've got some guys that you want to talk to them. Or if you need some inspiration, have them listen to this podcast, right?
Absolutely. And we're lucky. We have a heck of a group of men folk that we spend time with regularly. And the those relationships and the exchanges within those relationships and the love and the sharing and the support are incredible. And I know we take it for granted, but we're so lucky.
Yeah, it's interesting. I thinking about passing on the mantle, the father to sons or to daughters and the next generation. I'd mention it again. This is a theory I can't prove, but all of our children are moving in a very successful way. I think our kids are more successful and prepared and better people as individuals because of our friendship with each other as men. I think that we helped us become better fathers and people and model that to our kids. And I think our kids are better for it.
Well, let me say this. I have no idea where I would be without you guys.
Me too.
And I don't think I'd be nearly as happy in my life without you guys.
Absolutely.
So absolutely, this has been impactful to my fatherhood, to my children.
Yeah. And what that means is that if it's impactful for your kids are better for it. They will be better parents. And this is how it goes beyond this generation to the next generation. This is how we teach, not just so that the kids have skills, but we teach to teach. This is how we show our children also how to teach their kids, right? To build this relationship of adult friendship so that overall the community gets better generation after generation. And boy, isn't that our job?
And at some point, all of our children will probably have a thought along the lines of, man, I need a group of friends like they had and have in my life.
That's right. And we certainly hope they get it. All right.
Absolutely.
All righty, my friend. Well, I love you, and I thank you for being a part of this again.
I love you too, and I appreciate the invitation, and we can do this anytime you like.
You got it.
Thanks, Chris.
Right on. What a great conversation about the responsibilities we have and what we can do with those responsibilities. I'm of a mind as I get older to seek out ways in which I can give. Who needs a moment of attention? Where can I drop a pearl? Where can I get a pearl from someone else and pull it in and then pass it on to someone else? Where can I seek out a mentee? Where can I really work hard to get a mentor? How can I find someone who's 20 years older than I am to talk to? These are all things that we all have to do. The mantle of manhood is beautiful. It's confusing. We're not quite sure how we handle it, but what I do know is that there are more of us out there who want to help us handle it if we give them the opportunity to do so. Most people want to help. Most men want to find ways in which they can show something that they've learned to pass on. Everybody loves to teach at some point. And when you know something and you can teach it, not only is the other person going to move a little bit forward, but you move forward too. You get so much better if you can teach. And it doesn't have to be in a classroom. It doesn't have to be volunteering in an elementary school. It doesn't have to be always to your kids of showing them what's right and wrong. It just has to be living. Every single moment that you're with someone else, or even with yourself, is a teachable moment for you and for them. So find it, figure it out, and do your best to pass it on. If you like this, tell other folks, sign up, subscribe, let people know about this podcast. I really appreciate you listening, and I hope you joined the conversation. Word bid Filarid.